Ah.
As I said in the previous video, the block had to go to a machine shop for resurfacing, and after it came back I started cleaning it up and getting it ready to paint it. In the meantime, John, as known as the customer, hello customer, so John also cleaned up himself a lot of parts for the engine, like the oil pan, the front engine plate, the valve cover, and many other parts, so he helped a lot with the preparation of the engine. Using a brass wire wheel, so I don't damage anything, I cleaned the block outside and also all the gasket surfaces, so there's no any residue from all the gaskets and silicone and stuff like that. And then I started chasing all the threads all over the engine. Wherever there was a threaded hole, I chased the threads so to make sure that everything is fine there. When I was disassembling the engine, I noticed that the threads on the sealing block, the aluminum block that goes right on top of the front main bearing cap, the threads on that block were stripped and somebody put silicone there to hold the bolts inside. So I ordered new block for there. Here Jake found some interesting signs in his office and gave me one if I wanted to use on my Spitfire. Then I masked all the surfaces that I didn't want to paint. I also installed the front engine plate and the timing cover so they can be painted in place. And then I started priming. When I paint like that with the front engine plate mounted and the cover, I don't need to mask the surfaces for the gaskets, and I only paint the parts that are visible. I primed also the head, which I also had to mask before that, of course, the oil sump and the rear engine plate. I would install the rear engine plate too, but the engine was mounted on the stand, so I didn't want to remove it. That's why I hanged it on the side of this cart. And when the primer dried, I started painting with black engine enamel paint. And with that I was ready to start assembling the engine. I started with the crankshaft, and the first thing, or actually the last thing before I put it in the engine, was to clean the passageways, the oil passageways. I can't stress how important is that, because while cleaning it, while sitting on the bench or whatever, it's possible that some debris went inside and blocked the passageways. So I made sure that all the oil passageways were clean and oil would travel without any problems. I did the same with the passageways inside the engine between the main bearings and the camshaft bearings. And now I could start installing the one half of the main bearings in their places. I made sure at the back it says standard as I ordered them. I also put some oil under each one, just in case, there's no friction on that side of the bearing, but still I didn't want to put them dry. And then on this side of the bearings I put a lot of oil, because this is where the crankshaft is spinning and it needs to be oily. I carefully lowered the crankshaft and then I put even more oil. I wanted to make sure that there is no dry spot anywhere. Next I installed the other halves of the main bearings on the main bearing caps and started putting them in place. I was checking carefully the numbers because they are numbered, they cannot be mixed, each one has to go on its place. So there is a number on the side of the main bearing cap, and also there is a number on the gasket surface for the oil sump. So these two numbers have to match. Again, I was using a lot of oil. It is never too much, you know. Before main bearing cap number 4, I had to install the thrust washers. If you watched my previous video, you know that on the crankshaft there was a huge amount of endplay. I wasn't sure what size thrust washers I needed, so I ordered two sets, one standard size and one oversized 0.005. So with this altogether 4 washes, I could have 3 combinations, like 2 standard size or 2 oversized, or even 1 standard size and 1 oversized. So I hope that with one of these 3 combinations I would get my correct amount of end play, which should be between 6 and 8 thousandths of an inch. So what I did first was I installed the 2 oversized bearings, and with them there was absolutely no end play on the crankshaft. So I realized that that was too much, and then I installed the 2 standard size bearings, and then I got 8 thousandths of an inch of end play, which was perfect. This time it is very important to have the correct amount of end play, so I didn't use filler gauges, of course. This time I used the magnetic stand and dial gauge. So that's exactly 8 thousandths of an inch end play. And now I could install the last bearing cap, put the bolts and torque them. The torque here needs to be between 50 and 65 foot-pounds. So I'm going with 65. And then I made sure that the crank still spins freely. I wasn't sure if this was gonna work, but I wanted to try to install the rear oil seal housing before removing the engine from the stand. So first I installed the seal in the housing. And I used Permatex Aviator's Forma gasket to install the gasket in place. I put gasket maker on both sides of the gasket. And then I put some oil on the crank and on the seal, so I don't put it dry. And I installed the housing, which surprisingly worked. I was lucky. Next I cleaned the filter on the oil pump. There was something huge inside. So I blew it and it came out, and I took it. I think it was some kind of silicone, or I don't know, something like that. But it was huge and it was blocking more than half of the filter. So that's very important. You have to make sure that the filter is clean and the oil can travel without any problems to the oil pump. Then I oiled all the parts of the pump and put it in place. In the last video I measured the clearances between the rotors and the body, and everything was okay, so I could install it permanently now. Then I carefully oiled and installed the camshaft. And I started getting ready to install the front engine plate. But I totally forgot about the sealing block, which goes above or under, in this situation, the main bearing cup. So it's a good thing that this gasket maker is non-setting, so it could wait until I install the sealing block and then come back to the gasket and the front engine plate. So there are two little gaskets here and two pieces of rubber that go on the two sides of the sealing block, and it's a little bit tricky to install it, because as the block goes in, the little pieces of rubber on the side stay out and don't go in with the block. So maybe there is a trick there, which I don't know. But anyways, when it was going down, I noticed something else. It was sitting too high, much higher than the surface for the gasket for the oil sump. So I compared it to the old one, and there was obvious difference, maybe with 1/32 of an inch or something like that. So I took it out and measured with the calipers, and there was a difference of I think around 30-35 thousandths of an inch between the old one and the new one. As I said, the threads on the old one were stripped, so I couldn't use it, and I had no choice but to grind the new one a little bit so it gets to the correct height. But you see, that's what's happening with the new aftermarket parts. Sometimes they don't match. So I took a piece of sandpaper, I think 120 grit, and I started sanding it carefully. I was doing only one side at a time, and the other side I was trying to keep flat on the surface of the table, so it keeps the piece straight. And when I reached to the correct height on the one side, then I turned the piece around and I started working on the other one. So it took me about half an hour, but at the end the piece was matching the exact height of the old one, and I was happy with that. And this time when I installed it, it was perfectly flush with the surface for the gasket for the oil sump. Now I could come back to the front engine plate. I installed the gasket, I put gasket maker on the other side too, and then I installed the plate with a couple of bolts. Two of them were on the locating plate for the camshaft, and a couple more just to hold it in place. And now I could bring the box with the marinated connecting rods and pistons. Let's see if they are delicious enough. Mmm, yummy! So if you haven't watched the previous episode, these are prepared connecting rods with the matching piston, with the piston rings, with new connecting rod bearings, so they are ready to go inside the engine. They are numbered, so they have to go in a certain cylinder. Everything is measured, all the clearances match a specific cylinder. So I guess this is the number 1. I took the connecting rod cap off, and then I used a lot of oil all over the piston, around the rings, everywhere, in the cylinder, on the bearing, in the big end, everywhere, a lot of oil. Then I staggered the piston rings, the gaps. I put them as far as possible, one from each other. And then I carefully lowered the piston in the cylinder. The crank is positioned at the bottom dead center right now, so the connecting rod doesn't reach it yet. I use this screwdriver to keep the rings a little bit higher, so I can install the ring clamp. I tightened the clamp as much as possible around the rings. And then I made sure that the top end is all leveled, which means that the bottom level is all leveled too, parallel to the surface of the block, and then carefully tapped the piston down until it went into the cylinder, and that's it. Then I flipped the block and fastened the big end of the connecting rod to the camshaft. I oiled this bearing as well. As we said, the more oil the better. So I was putting all over the place oil, even though I hate when my hands are oily or greasy or anyways, I put the bolts and I just tightened them with socket, but I left the torque part for the end, when all the pistons are in and all the connecting rods are fastened. And then I repeated the same procedure with the cylinders number 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. It's a good thing it was not V12, huh? And now was the time to torque the connecting rod bolts. The torque here must be 46 foot-pounds. So I did 1 and 6 at the same time, then 2 and 5, and at the end 3 and 4. Then I made sure that the crank is still spinning freely, which it did. And then I put the oil sump temporarily there just to protect the crank and the bottom end from some dust and debris while I work on the top end. And there must be some magic in this engine, because at some point all the people from the shop came to see what was going on with this engine. See? You see, they don't work, you see, they don't work. So everyone punched out. I'm not. Because you live here. Yeah, he's right, I live in the shop. And I love it. Anyways, stay tuned for the next episode when we're gonna be degreeing the camshaft.